Yesterday we observed that the occasion for the delivery of the Bhagavad Gita was a field of war which is very conspicuous in its occurrence in the context of the Mahabharata. As we have observed, the Bhagavad Gita is not intending to tell us a story, to entertain us during our leisure hours, but to give a permanent message for the salvation of the soul of the human being. That is why it is called a Yoga Shastra or a scripture of yoga. Whatever is said in this great scripture is a sermon on the practice of yoga. And the necessity for the teaching arises on account of a conflict in which one finds oneself at any given moment of time in one's life. And the whole of the Mahabharata is a story of conflict. And you will gradually realize that the practice of yoga resolves itself into a simple system of the overcoming and balancing of forces for the purpose of resolving all conflict. The whole universe moves in two directions. We may say the centripetal and the centrifugal. There is an outward urge of the universe which propels it in the direction of space and time and externality. There is also an impulse to maintain its integrality of status inwardly, and these two tendencies in the universe, which I compared to the centrifugal and the centripetal tendencies of energy, represent the character of the whole of creation. And this character that we see in the whole of creation is sympathetically reflected in every one of us, so that we are also at every moment of time centrifugal and also centripetal. We have an externalizing impulse towards activity, social relationship and contacts of various kinds. And at the same time we have a very powerful impulse to maintain our integrality and status. We do not wish to lose our independence and status in the name of outward relationship or even social welfare. All this is conditioned by a need we feel to maintain our freedom, what we may call our own status. Who would like to lose his status in the name of something else? But side by side with this impulse to retain our individuality or integrality of status, there is also a propulsion we feel towards externalization, which also we cannot resist. We run about day in and day out, demonstrating thereby that a complete inwardization and a maintenance of personal status is not the completion of life. This has to be set in tune or harmonized with the external world or universe. While you are bent upon maintaining your freedom and independence and status, you are also compelled at the same time to recognize the existence of other people in the world, things around you, the vast world in front of your eyes, with which you have to maintain a balanced relationship. While we are, in a sense, a non-spatial and non-temporal indivisibility, which is what we call the status we maintain, we are also in a world of space and time. We are like a double-edged sword which cuts both ways, or like a person who is pulled equally in two different directions, and now one urge preponderating and now the other one preponderating. The cosmical impulse corresponding to this psychological impasse through which we are passing is designated in the language of Indian philosophy, especially the Vedanta and the Sankhya and the Yoga, as the forces of the matrix of all things known as Prakriti, a Sanskrit word, which means the original substance of all creation. The material of the universe is called Prakriti. It is constituted of certain forces, powers or energies, properties. These are known in Sanskrit as Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. Terms known to you already. Rajas is the name that we give to the impulsion dragging anything outwardly into the space-time complex and compelling everything to relate itself to things outside. And Sattva is the counterbalancing urge which obliges you to maintain an indivisibility of internal status, which requires you to maintain a balance and not lose the alignment of your inward layers of personality or the external relationships in society. You know very well that if there is no proper alignment of the inward structure of your psyche, you go crazy, you become neurotic, and you become a patient psychopathologically. Health is nothing but the harmony of the layers of our personality. If they are disbalanced, we are sick physically or psychologically. So there is a necessity to maintain inward balance, but that will not do entirely. We have also to maintain a similar balance in our relationships outside. There should be a balanced relationship between you and me. For instance, a balanced relationship with the five elements and yourself: earth, water, fire, air, ether, the climatic conditions, and various other things that constitute what we call the outward life of the individual. There is a conflict, therefore, everywhere, cosmically and individually. Life is a battle, a situation which does not require a commentary. It is a struggle from birth to death. It is a process of confronting something or the other every day. A necessity that you feel every moment of time to resolve a situation that has risen in front of you. When you wake up in the morning, you are face to face with the reality that confronts you as a conflict. You have conflicts inside and conflicts outside. we are not always happy, because happiness is the outcome of the preponderance of Sattva Guna, the balancing power within us. And to the extent we are balanced inwardly and outwardly, that extent we are also happy, delighted, joyous. To the extent Rajas preponderates in us and there is a tendency to upset everything. It may be an upsetting of the layers of our own individual personality or an upsetting of our relationships with outside world. Any kind of upsetting of an existing balance is a tendency to the absence of sorrow, absence of joy, which is tantamount to entering into grief and sorrow. The whole of life is an arena of such a conflict. If you read Homer's Iliad or Odyssey, if you read Milton's Paradise Lost, if you read Ramayana of Valmiki, if you read the Mahabharata, you will find everywhere the same thing presented in various languages and styles. The whole picture presented being a tremendous conflict and a rubbing of shoulders, as it were, a circumstance into which we are thrown unwittingly. The circumstance becoming worse when we have not got the adequate understanding of the causes of these occurrences. Our condition is becoming worse because we do not know why this situation has arisen at all, why there should be conflict of any kind, why should we not be happy always, why should there not be a balance, harmony and equilibrated relationship inwardly and outwardly. We do not know and nobody can know for reasons obvious. But this state of affairs cannot continue for a long time and we do not wish that it should continue for a long time. We are not merely entangled individuals, but also individuals in whom is planted a light of reason and a flash of an insight which occurs sometimes in our personal lives, telling us that in spite of the unfortunate circumstance in which we find ourselves every day in this world, there seems to be a hope for a better condition. We do not always entertain a despairing mood of dejection and utter hopelessness. Though occasionally when the power of rajas of external relationship and the loss of inward stability becomes very strong and preponderating, we may lose our balance completely. We may not be even able to think in a right manner. But these occasions are rare. Usually, we are able to realize that there is a justice in the universe. Though in moments of intense suffering, we are likely to complain against the system of things and find fault with the structure of the universe. But this we do not do always. There are moments of sobriety when we are able to think in a better manner and feel that there is a need for the resolution of this conflict and there should be a way. the urge felt within us to resolve a conflict should also be an indication of the possibility of the resolution of the conflict. You cannot entertain merely a hopeless hope. A hope is hopeful. It is not negativity. When you assure yourself that things shall be better one day, in some way or the other, some insight is speaking from inside you. And that is the inward status of integrality that speaks to you in a language of super physical language. These epics of the great masters, whether of the East or the West, are therefore a depiction of the drama of life. It is a play of various circumstances, situations, and colors, each looking independent of the other, but somehow collaborating to present the picture of a completeness as in a drama. The dramatic personae, the people who enact the play, are independent and isolated in their performances. It does not mean that everyone who is enacting a play will present the same picture and place before you an identical situation. Every individual, every person enacting the play is different from the other and has a performance which is distinct from the other. But the whole drama is a completeness by itself. It is not a distracted chaos. It is a harmony and you enjoy the play. When the whole enactment is over, you are delighted. This is wonderful performance. Thus, you make a remark and go with happiness. You do not say, oh, this man said that man said this. There is no connection between one another. You realize the connection. In spite of the variegated scenes that are presented in the drama, which may run for hours together in the night, and the pictures may be completely different, individually perceived. But the wholeness that is behind it is the delighting feature. So is life. Such is the intention of the writing of epics, whether of Homer or of Vyasa, who wrote the Mahabharata. We are always not in a position to see the wholeness that is behind this picture in the form of the drama of creation. We are dramatic personae in this great field of activity called this cosmos. The whole world is a stage, said Shakespeare, and we are all the people who are acting this drama. But we are not always conscious that we are playing the drama. This consciousness is wrested out of us somehow or other by some unfortunate occurrence in us. Look at the fate of a person who is performing one role in a dramatic enactment. He forgets his relationship with other performers. He behaves as if he is absolutely independent and he has no connection with the entirety of the play. He does not know that there is a director of the play. He does not know the intention behind the performance. He is simply acting absolutely independently and presenting an isolated picture. He would cut a sorry figure and he would spoil the whole game. This we are doing every day. We are spoiling the whole game of life, not knowing that we are items in the totality of dramatic personae, in this grand enactment of the drama of life, of which the Supreme Being, God Himself is the director and His vision is the totality of the picture of the drama. The Bhagavad Gita takes up this point of view of the completeness or the totality that is behind this wonderful picture of creation and the necessity that is to be there for recognizing a harmony in the midst of conflicting forces apparently who look like conflicting powers on account of their isolated individualities, not related harmoniously one with the other. So, the difficulty is the excessive preponderance of one of the powers of Prakriti at some time or the other, on which we lean due to the force exerted upon us by one or the other of the powers. Apart from Rajas and Sattva, the externalizing and the stabilizing power out in the universe as well as in us, there is a third condition called tamas, inertia. In the language of physics and science, you would have heard it said that there are two forces, stasis and kinesis, or dynamics. There is no such thing as sattva in science. They are not concerned with it, and perhaps they are not willing even to think of it. There are only two conditions of things. Either they are in a state of inertia or they are dynamic and expressed in some form of activity. So we are, and everything is, in one of these conditions, sometimes in all these conditions, working together in some sort of a proportion. And we are, therefore, in a field of opposition of these forces, which work simultaneously in the universe outside and in the personality of ours inwardly. So the whole universe is a battlefield in the sense of this metaphysical description of the constitution of the universe. You understand why the Bhagavad Gita is given in the context of a war and not in a chapel or a convent, a temple of worship. The whole universe is a temple, no doubt, in one sense. It is the shrine of the Supreme Being, the Absolute. You can adore God in anything and everything. But it is not merely that. It is a power that works in a threefold manner, presenting this picture of creation as a permutation and combination of sattva, rajas and tamas. So the very first verse of the Bhagavad Gita brings into highlight two important words, Dharma Kshetra and Kurukshetra. Very significant terms indeed. It is a field of tremendous activity and conflict and warfare and battle. It is also a field of justice and law. Kurukshetra and Dharmakshetra. There is a law that integrates these apparently conflicting powers. In the same way as there is a law inside us which integrates the cells of our physical body into a wholeness of personality. Every cell of our body is different from the other. It can disintegrate when the life force is withdrawn from it. It dissolves itself into the five elements. It decays, decomposes itself and loses its oneness. Every thought is different from every other thought. You can think 1000 things every day, and yet you know that you are the person thinking these 1000 things. I thought something yesterday, and I am thinking something today. Though there is no apparent connection between yesterday's thought and today's thought, you know that there is a connection because you are the person thinking these two thoughts. So there is an integration of the psychic structure as well as the physical body. This is the dharma or the law which organizes things. Law is a name that we give to the system which organizes bodies into a completeness or meaningful wholeness, instead of there being scattered particulars or meaningless chaos. Dharma is law. You may also call it justice. That which has to be under the system of the universe is the justice of the universe. And the way in which this justice operates in terms of the various particularities is the law, dharma. So there is activity, there is movement, there is change, there is transformation, permutation and combination, all pointing out to an apparent diversity of things. But this is not the whole truth of the matter. There is an organization everywhere, right from the atom to the solar system. Even an atom is not a chaos. There is a tremendous balance maintained by the constituents of an atom. The electrons getting conditioned and ruled by a central nucleus, and the solar system working beautifully by the power of the sun, who organizes the movement of the planets. And also, a similar power is working within our own bodies, on account of which we are, as individuals, a complete organized body. Our personality is not a chaos. It is not simply a distraction. In a moment we can become crazy if that were the case. We would be just nobodies and meaningless madmen. But we are sane individuals with a tremendous capacity to think consistently, logically, and in an organized manner. So there is a dharma operating everywhere, in the whole cosmos, in the entire creation, in our own selves, in the atom, and everything. Notwithstanding the fact that there is distraction, difference, individualization, egoism, externalization, suspicion, and so on and so forth. The bringing together of these two tendencies is the purpose of yoga. Neither are you to lean externally too much in an extrovert manner and be a busybody who has lost one's own soul. Nor you are expected to be a hibernating frog in a small well of our individuality, completely unrelated to the outward world, an introvert of a psychoanalytical type. We are not to be a psychopathological introvert or an extrovert of that type, but we are to be balanced. The whole teaching of the Gita is the teaching on balance, samatva, equality, and putting in order of everything that is not in order. Things do not appear to be in order or in a state of harmony because of a preponderance of some aspect of this externalizing power known as rajas. There is struggle everywhere, in everything, at all times, a struggle to maintain a balance. All struggle is a struggle towards the maintenance of equilibrium in any field of life, in any plane of existence. Why do you want a government? Because you want to maintain equilibrium in administration. You do not want chaos. There are laws of various types. The governmental law, the social law, the communal law, the family law, and various other systems of management, all which signify one and the same thing, namely the necessity to maintain harmony. And it has to be maintained everywhere, in every walk of life, in any given moment of time. If there is lack of balance anywhere, in any part of our body, for instance, or any part of human society, there is anxiety creeping into our experience at once. We are immediately unhappy. If there is a little thorn pricking the soles of our feet, all your joy goes in 1 second. You will be always thinking of this thorn in the foot. With all your wealth and status and greatness, this you cannot forget. There is a thorn in the foot. You are perpetually conscious of it. Oh, I have to remove it. If there is some intractable element in society which is disturbing the peace of mind of people, you are obliged to be conscious of its existence, and you are also compelled to see what means can be adopted in setting right the situation. Even one single element is sufficient to disturb the entire balance. Just as a little intense earache is sufficient to make you grieved whole day, or a toothache, or an eye pain, a headache, and so on. With all other facilities, these things can upset us. So there should not be any kind of occasion for disbalance, even in the littlest manner. And the whole of yoga is a comprehensive approach to the situation of cosmic conflict, which sympathetically reflects itself in every individual also, so that we see conflict outside as well as in our own selves. Now, conflict there is obvious enough. We all know that the world is wretched. We complain about the world every day, that it is stupid and it is going to dogs. We are very much concerned about the future, but we are not fully awakened to the needs of the hour and the means that are to be employed and the way we have to conduct ourselves under such circumstances. We are not in a state of yoga. We only perceive things as they happen outwardly in the world of space and time. We are sense-ridden and entangled completely in the perceptions of the senses. We are living in a sense world, and we are wholly relying upon the reports of the senses. We do not exercise our reason and understanding to that extent, as much as would be necessary to counterbalance these distracting reports that we receive from the senses. Our reason is not equally strong. Our understanding is feeble, but the senses are vigorous. They are impetuous. So we are very low in the cadre of creation. We have fallen very low indeed. While the senses are very active, rebellious, the organizing power in us, the understanding, is not equally powerful. Just as you can imagine the state of affairs. If individuals who rebel are stronger than the organizing power of the government, this is what has happened to us. This organizing power in us called reason and understanding is not able to cope up with the situation of conflict that is presented before us in experience by the senses that work in terms of the objects outside. We are slaves of the senses and not masters. And we stoop down every moment to the level of a demand of a particular sense organ. And this cannot be regarded as freedom of any kind. Whatever the senses say is okay by our reason and understanding, by our knowledge and education, by our culture. Everything that we have are subsidiary stooges, as it were, to these rebellious dacoits called the senses. The Bhagavad Gita does not want this circumstance or situation to continue. There should be a tremendous organizing force, a central government, to establish a central organizing government in this whole cosmos. And as a consequence thereof in our own selves and in society, is to enter into the field of yoga. We always argue in terms of human society and human relationship, and not in the light of reason and higher understanding. We have poor reason and sentimental argument to justify our social circumstance. But we have not got reason and understanding enough to awaken ourselves to the existence of a higher power or dharma, the power of God or the law of the universe. And therefore, the Bhagavad Gita takes our stand as a good teacher in a school or a college and leads us by our hand by degrees to the various levels to which we have to rise for the purpose of real freedom that we have to achieve. The greater is the operation of law and justice, and the greater is its intensity of action, the greater is the freedom that we feel. If the law of the government is strong, we are assured that we can have freedom as citizens of a country. But there is no strength in the administration. Our freedom as citizens can be lost in a moment. And we are after the freedom that can be always there and not fly like birds the next moment. Salvation and freedom mean the same thing. And as I mentioned yesterday, a recognition of law and obedience to law is necessary in order to achieve freedom and enjoy it. If we do not know how the law of the universe operates in relation to ourselves and other things, if you do not know the law of your own country, how can you abide by that law? You are ignorant of the law, and therefore you are likely to blunder. And we are blundering every day. And every blunder in respect of law is to court punishment from the court of law. And we are punished. And this punishment comes upon us as a grief, a sorrow, an unhappiness, an insecurity, a feeling that something is wrong. The Bhagavad Gita places us in the context of society at the very outset. The situation in which we are today. We are nationals of a country and we are human beings with a relationship obtaining in mankind as a whole. We always think in terms of human relationship. It is well known. We argue in this manner. This is the subject of the very first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where the whole social structure is taken as the stand for the argument in connection with any action to be taken under a particular situation. And taking Arjuna as the symbol of mankind, the epic of the Mahabharata, in its gospel of the Bhagavad Gita, tells us how we think as individuals. We are faced with a warring situation, and our activities in daily life are our efforts to solve these situations. The work that you do in your office, the labor that you put forth in a factory, and any other work that you do in any walk of life is the effort that you put forth to resolve a conflict and solve a situation. But we do not always do it properly. So, a factory worker need not be happy and an office goer need not be happy. So your activities need not bring you happiness. You may be always a complaining master. Oh, everything is hopeless in spite of all that I do. This is all we have to say after everything is said and done throughout the day. The whole thing is wretched. There is nothing for me to say. The less said, the better. So we are stooping down to this circumstance of utter hopelessness and wretchedness, because we have not found time to walk with the light of reason and the justice of the universe. We cannot see them with our eyes. Just as you cannot see a government, for instance. Anything that is impersonal cannot be seen with the eyes. You cannot see even money. You see only a piece of paper called note or a metal piece called coin. And money is something different. It is a value that is embedded in the symbols called note or coin, and that value cannot be seen with the eyes. You cannot see anything impersonal, you can see only persons, individuals. The higher law is an impersonal operation, and therefore it is not an object of the senses. Inasmuch as we are depending on the senses for our experience and judgment of things, we are unable to take advantage of the existence of these impersonal powers, reason and insight. Arjuna was in that condition. He was always thinking in terms of his relationship with people. As a son of so-and-so, as a grandson of so-and-so, as a nephew of so-and-so, as a relative of so-and-so, with ulterior motives behind actions of every kind. Just as we gird up our loins to do something very vigorously every day, Arjuna girded up his loins to embark upon a war, the Mahabharata battle. I shall do this is our determination in the early morning of the day. This has to be done. And so was the contemplation in the mind of Arjuna. And all people along his side, they decided that such a step has to be taken. And the decision was complete. and there was a necessity to implement the decision. This need for the implementation of the decision is the entering into the field of battle. This is also the entering of ourselves into the field of the practice of yoga, towards which the Bhagavad Gita shall take us. Hari Om Tat Sat.